Hello, my name is Katie Dumac, and this is my final project for EDT 6040. So the current unit that I have is sequencing fairy tales. In this unit, my students will work on their sequencing skills by reading fairy tales. Normally this is really helpful because fairy tales always have a solid beginning, middle, and end. The students will also be working on writing narratives using sequencing transition words like first, next, then, or last. The Common Core State Standards that are attached to this unit are RL 1.2, that's normally our sequencing standard, being able to retell stories, including the details and understanding of their central message or lesson which goes along with fairy tales. RL 1.3, which is describing characters, settings, and major events in a story, like using key details. And then we also have a writing standard because their final part of this unit will be the students need to write a narrative in which they recount 2 or more appropriately sequenced events, and including some details what happened and using those temporal words like first, next, and last. The students in my class, I have 20 first graders. 7 of them receive ENL services, English as a New Language. They speak Spanish. And I have 1 student with an IEP, who generally just needs to be watched for behavioral purposes. The technology we have available at our school, we have 4 carts of 30 Chromebooks, and each cart can be checked out for use in a classroom. One website that I plan on using is a website called storyboardthat.com. It is not free, however, you can get a free 14-day trial. And on that website, the students can create storyboards using different templates, so not just like a 3-square template, which you will see me use throughout this PowerPoint, but they have different templates that they can use if the student so prefers that. The storyboard that also offers hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of backgrounds and images and props and things like that. You can manipulate the characters, change the colors of things. It's useful for the students to be creative when they're writing and when they're working on sequencing the events of their stories. Another website that I'm going to use is called Safe Share TV, and I use that website almost every single day, and I use it to transfer my YouTube videos onto there, so there are no commercials or anything like that that'll stop the video in the middle to show a commercial that would not be appropriate for my first graders. The current unit, I previously would just read the students a fairy tale, and then they would work on writing down the order in which the story would happen. And for my students that struggle with writing, they would draw pictures, and sometimes I would have them discuss with each other as well. Normally with fairy tales, that would just last about a week, and each day I would read a fairy tale, and we would do some sort of activity somewhere along the lines of those. With those fairy tales. Sometimes towards the end of the week I would have the students make a mini poster with a partner of the story that we had read, making sure they draw a picture for the beginning, middle, and end of the story, and then sometimes writing a sentence with that too. Sometimes my students, since this is something that we've been working on throughout the year and we'll come back to it, they struggle with finding the most important part of the beginning, middle, and end of the story. A lot of times they'll just open it up to the first page, look at the first picture, and just draw that. We're really focusing on what was the most important part of the beginning, middle, and end, kind of finding that main idea of the beginning, main idea of the middle, main idea of the end. Like I said, this is something we come back to throughout the year. We hit it several times throughout the year, sequencing, but there is a week where I use fairy tales to help focus this skill. And the books I used to teach this skill were Goldilocks and the 3 Little Pigs, Little Red Riding Hood, and Cinderella. At the end of the unit, the students would write their own story or fairy tale using sequence transition words like first, next, and last. The changes that I would be making to this unit would, instead of just reading the stories aloud, I would be having them watch YouTube videos through Safe Share TV. I would give them the links to see that, maybe through Google Classroom. Students would be assigned different fairy tales and asked to create a storyboard to show beginning, middle, and end, rather than everybody doing the same one. Students will share with others their storyboards to give a brief summary of their story, and then they're going to watch their video to discuss and compare to the storyboard. They're going to use a graphic organizer to start writing their fairy tale, and then students will complete the fairy tale they have written on a storyboard, on Storyboard That, to share with the class. The first change that I made was YouTube videos of the fairy tales rather than the just read alouds. Instead of showing pictures of the fairy tale books on the document camera, students will be watching videos of the fairy tales. They'll be shown through SafeShare, and the videos also have text so they can read along as they're watching the videos. Instead of everybody doing the same video each day, each student will be assigned a video to watch, and then they will create their storyboard off of that. But each student will end up seeing all of the videos. This change was made to allow the students to be able to see moving images to match the text as they are reading and hearing to better help them visualize the story, and seeing the moving images and interpreting them to create the still images of the beginning, middle, and end of a story will help them develop their skills further in sequencing. The next change that I made was using Storyboard That, the website, to sequence assigned fairy tales. So each student will be assigned a fairy tale to watch, and then they will use the website storyboardthat.com to create a 3-board storyboard to sequence the events of their fairy tale. The students will then share it with another student who has read a different fairy tale or watched a different fairy tale. And after they look at their storyboard, then they'll watch the video, and then the students will discuss how that student's storyboard either correctly or incorrectly sequences the events of the fairy tale. So the example that I have here is of Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Now, I didn't include text on this one because I figured for the first part of the unit, students would just be creating images because their final project they are going to be writing. Maybe with the higher students, I would have them write a sentence and include text on theirs. So for this, we have the bears went for a walk, then in the middle, Goldilocks sat in their chair, and if they wanted, they could have added other boards or boxes in here, but since we want just a beginning, middle, and end, I just have 3, and then at the end, the bears find Goldilocks sleeping in the little bear's bed. The next change that I made was for the students to use a graphic organizer. So at the end of the unit, the students are going to be creating their own fairy tale using transition sequencing words like first, next, and last. Before creating their final draft, though, students will be using a graphic organizer to help them. Now, before, I did have them kind of jot it down in kind of a graphic organizer. It was more like just open your journal and draw a picture of your ideas. In this case, I will be having them use a graphic organizer so they can more organize their thoughts as to what happens first in their story, what happens next in their story, and what happens last. The type of chart or organizer that I would be using would be a flow chart because it'll help the students visualize how their story needs to connect throughout from beginning to end. So this is an example of the graphic organizer that I would be using. It has a first, next, and last. It has space for the students to draw a picture if they need to. A lot of times I'll have them draw a picture first and then write their sentence, so it helps get their creative juices flowing and they can figure out kind of in their head what they visualize their story to look like, and then they would write a sentence. So this would be the graphic organizer I would use. They would draw a picture first, and then they would start writing their sentences for their first draft. For their final writing assignment, the students will be using Storyboard That to write and create their final writing assignment. This writing assignment connects back to sequencing because they are using those words first, next, and last, and they have to create something that they know would happen in a sequential order. So we can't have the girl marrying the prince before she's even met him. So this will help them in creating a sequenced story using those higher level thinking skills. So they're going to use Storyboard That to write and create their final writing assignment. There are several templates available for the students to use based on their fairy tale. So there's not just the 3-board, standard. There's tons and tons of different ways that they could use it. There's ones where there's 6 boards. There's some where it looks like a flow chart and things like that as well. The students will be including text in these. So like on the graphic organizer, the text that they had been starting to write on here will end up in their final writing. So it's different from when they were practicing just sequencing a story that they had heard. In this case, they're taking the images from their graphic organizer and they're transferring them onto the storyboard, that including pictures. So an example that I created, which is just a typical kind of Cinderella kind of thing, where it says, first there was a young girl whose family's farm was not doing so well. Next, the young girl went to the prince to ask for help for her family's farm. The prince helped the young girl and her family. While the prince was helping the girl and her family, he fell in love with her. Last, they got married and lived happily ever after. The end. Now, these images in the background, those were backgrounds available to use. The characters, they had the characters from different time periods that you could use. You could change the color of their hair. You can change the way that their faces look. You can change the way their arms, and you can change them from standing to sitting. And so that would be helpful in visual literacy to see, the students being able to say, in the beginning of the story, this girl was sad, to the end of the story where she's happy and she's got her head tilted towards her new prince and they're hugging and things like that. And then in the middle, you can see that the prince is worried and the girl is asking a question with her arms out and her head tilted to the side. You can move the characters around to kind of show exactly what you want the story to look like. And finally, we have the assessment. The students will be assessed on their final writing using a rubric. We use standards-based grading, so this would be for W1.3, being able to write a narrative using temporal words and details. So to get a 3, they would have to have more than 2 appropriately sequenced events. At least 3 would be the max for the students, because we're looking for a beginning, middle, and end. They want to make sure that the narrative had a detail for the beginning, middle, and end, not just like first picture, next picture, last picture. And then using temporal words, they have to use all 3. If they didn't use all of them, that would knock them down to a 2, and if they didn't use any at all, it would knock them down to a 1. We don't give 4s for exceeding expectations, so it's just, did they meet? Are they developing, or are they not meeting yet if they're just beginning? So that is my unit and the changes that I've made. Thank you very much.